So when it comes to things that you want to make sure you have in place, at the outset, you want to be protecting your actual brand that you're creating. So whether you're a personal brand, maybe primarily your name, or it's a name that you've come up with that identifies your brand assets, like a signature course that you're offering, or your business name as a whole. So you want to protect those sorts of things, and you do that with trademarks.
Three, two, one. Welcome to the Campfire Circle. I'm your host, Tanya Bhattacharya, and I empower purpose-driven women in building influential personal brands that drive change and raise revenue. We all talk about getting a seat at the table, but why though? Who wants to sit in a stuffy boardroom anyway? Let's reimagine the ultimate space of leadership as a campfire circle, where we share stories that inspire movements, build brave communities to huddle together with for warmth, and where there is always room. Come sit with us.
Okay, folks, I am so excited and happy to have Casey Handy Smith here, joining us by the Campfire Circle. So I first learned about Casey and got to know Casey when I bought her VIP day contract from her template shop. And since then, I've gotten to know her as just an amazingly vision-led, mission-led client friend. And so Casey partners with Black creatives and entrepreneurs to protect their legacy by exposing the inevitable legal hurdles in business. She supports them in building a solid legal foundation and, this is really important, negotiating their worth. So I can't wait to dig into this deeper with you. And thank you for being here on the podcast, Casey.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. I have loved getting to know you over the past several months. And so just an honor to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's my pleasure. So we have a lot to talk about, but we can't get into anything before we talk about your story, because like everything, I know our missions are an evolution, right? And so can you tell me your story of what you have grown through to become the guide you are today?
Yeah, so I have been a licensed attorney now for almost a decade, which is hard to believe because it feels like just yesterday I was moving to Houston and starting law school and that entire journey. But before I ever became interested in law, I was always very interested and drawn to music and the arts because I come from a very musically inclined family. Everyone plays an instrument. I grew up as a classically trained pianist. I did regional and state competitions on piano and the flute and just picked up all sorts of instruments growing up in my childhood. And so I always had this love and passion for music and the arts. But early on, as much as I loved the creative process, I also was always really drawn to like business and entrepreneurship. And so for me, I was always looking for how could I merge this love of music and the arts with my own like entrepreneurial kind of insights and desires. Because growing up, what was always preached to me was to be successful as a Black person in this country, you go to college, get your degree, and get a good job. That's how you become successful. That's how, make money. And so I don't say questioned it, but I always, it didn't 100% sit well with me that this is the only way to do things, especially when I looked at just the natural creativity that my own family had. I look at, Black people in society as a whole set so many trends and influence so much of what creates our culture, but so few of us get to have the opportunity to really participate in the wealth that's generated from that creativity. So I'm like, how can we participate in that? How can we have that experience from the things that are so innate and natural to us outside of just going to college, getting a degree, and getting a good job? So, instead, oftentimes we're subjected to these predatory practices within different industries that take advantage of our IP. So I knew early on I wanted to explore that more and see how I could be a part of solving that problem. And so I would say once I got to college, that's when I learned that my undergraduate program had a music business program. And so for me, that felt like the perfect opportunity and merge of, okay, my interest in music and the arts and then the business side of things. And so very quickly, myself, my classmates, my professors, that I had the natural knack for understanding the business side of things, intellectual property, and how those things are protected. And so outside of class, I was helping my classmates review their contracts for shows that they were doing on the weekends and helping them make some different branding decisions on things that they were wanting to grow in their creative careers. And so that's how I got the start into the work that I do. And from there, I knew that I would need the actual technical skills to be able to really do this work. And so I said, okay, well, when I go to law school, I'm going to focus on entertainment, intellectual property, so I can continue this work of really supporting Black creatives and entrepreneurs.
I love that. I love that, Casey. That's such a fulsome story. And I want to ask you a follow-up question because I know today you have really niched into serving your Black entrepreneurs, Black creatives. Can you tell me a little bit more about your process of niching down? Like, was there a defining moment where you, or two or three, right, that prompted you really into like rooting into this versus serving just anyone?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. Because for me, when it comes to serving like Black creatives and entrepreneurs, I wouldn't say that there was one defining moment as much as it has been just my lived life experiences, right? As a
Yeah.
Black woman in America, experiencing less than ideal situations, experiencing times where I haven't felt like I've been valued as much as other people at the table. And so just wanting to serve as a voice for my own community and helping to really bridge that gap as we do pursue entrepreneurship and as we go into these bigger partnerships, making sure that we're really getting these equitable partnerships that value what we're bringing to the table. So for me, yeah, there was no like one defining moment, but just more so my own lived experiences and the things that were instilled in me at a young age, coming from a family that's deep roots in the South, descendants of slaves, all that good stuff. And so, yeah, so more so lived experience.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. You do such a beautiful job of this particular thing where something is happening in the news. This is a strategy people call newsjacking or whatever, but you just do it very fluidly and beautifully and with clarity. What I'm talking about is like sharing your take on a prominent news story that everybody's talking about and relating it back deeply to the work that you do and the why that you do. And doing this requires deep clarity in who you serve, right? And your point of view, or it doesn't really work. And I remember you did this like when Kanye was being Kanye, right? And a couple of other instances where you did this really well in your LinkedIn, but you were able to tie that story back to his brand collaboration with Adidas, which is a perfect example of what you were sharing where, you know, Black people set trends and yet very few get to own or participate in their wealth. And so, you know, it came out that he did not own his own IP. And so Adidas did. And yet that was unfortunately yet another example of what you're talking about right here. You know, and we see it
Yeah.
in the news all the time.
All the time. And so that's really what I mean by like lived experience. So not even just lived experience, but I mean, just if you're paying attention, right? I think most people can attest to having seen these stories or having seen these situations where things like this happen, where it's like, okay, you know, this person has created something, has this initial creative idea, but everyone else around them is getting wealthy off of it while they're just seemingly getting rich, getting like a little piece of the pie, but not actually being able to participate in the ownership of it, which is what ultimately leads to being able to build that generational wealth and that legacy through the things that you create.
100%. 100%. So I know, Casey, that you've worked a lot in the music industry, the entertainment industry, where protecting our assets is maybe an obvious thing to do, or maybe not, because we just talked about Kanye. But, you know, our listeners, our folk tend to be like working on, they're not necessarily putting out music or things like that. They might be, but they're really working on getting more visible as thought leaders, as authors, as keynote speakers, podcasters, right? Course creators, things like that. And so my question to you is for all of us, you know, creative entrepreneurs, service providers, coaches, consultants that are listening to this podcast, how do we get our legal house in order, right? Like what protections do we need in place?
Yeah, I love this question. And I love how you teed it up because I think a lot of times when you are not in quote unquote traditional like entertainment or kind of like IP heavy spaces, you don't even think about your intellectual property as much. You don't think about the value of those things. And that's something that I talk a lot about with clients because outside of, the traditional entertainment spaces, I do work with a lot of thought leading entrepreneurs like authors and podcasters, like you said, and keynote speakers. And so that intellectual property piece is just as big in those spaces as it is in the more kind of like traditional spaces like the music industry. So when it comes to things that you want to make sure you have in place at the outset, you want to be protecting your actual brand that you're creating. So whether you're a personal brand, maybe primarily your name, or it's a name that you've come up with that identifies your brand assets, like a signature course that you're offering or your business name as a whole. So you want to protect those sorts of things, and you do that with trademarks. So trademarks protect any brand identifying material. So that would be a business name, a course name, logo, slogans. Those are the types of things that are protected by trademarks. And then you also have the actual things that you're creating, which you also want to protect those. And you would do that through copyrights. So registered copyrights would give you protection of, say, a signature course, like you have the Kindling Collective. You wanted to really grow that, you would, want to protect that with a copyright registration. And just anything that you're creating that, is something that you're putting a lot of resources into, you would want to have a registered copyright for that. So those are like your outset kind of foundational things that you want to make sure you're legally protecting. And then, of course, contracts. I preach contracts all the time, right? And so with contracts, there's so much of it's kind of like two layers. You have your internal contract for your own like business and brand. So that you would have with contractors you work with. So like podcast editors, graphic designers, copywriters. So those contracts for your employees, making sure you have those in place, as well as contracts for your clients and your customers, your terms and conditions. And then obviously contracts with anyone you're doing anything collaborative with. So if a podcaster, you want to have contracts in place with whoever you may be collaborating with in that experience as well. And so those are just some high level things in terms of what legal protections you need to have in place. Of course, everyone's business is different. And so a lot of it is going to depend on your specific business, your needs, and what your ultimate goals are. But I do have a resource, a free resource, which is just a simple 5-minute business audit where people can just go and see where they currently stand when it comes to the legal things. Like, okay, here's a list of questions of some of the general things you should have in place. You can just check and see, do I have that? Do I need to have that? So you get an idea of where you may need to be heading on your journey of getting your legal house in order.
I think I would fail that audit, Casey. I think I would get like a red mark all over it. Like my strategy, I'm just going to air my dirty laundry. My strategy has really been like to keep my fingers crossed and hope. And I've been like, why am I like that? Like why? And I can't be the only one. Like I feel like there's a hope that, I don't know, like have you noticed this in your clients?
Oh yeah, literally all the time. I think it's the concept of like people don't think about how important things are until it's like too late, right? But one thing that I talk a lot about, which in working through Kindling Collective is, these inevitable hurdles. Like as your business grows and as your visibility increases, things are going to happen. It's not a matter of like, if they happen, if I cross my fingers and pray hard enough, like nothing go happen. Like, no, things are gonna happen. And whether or not those things are just a simple bump in the road or end up being a blunder that you now are spending ridiculous amounts of money, time, and energy having to dig yourself out of, really depends on what legal protections you had in place from the beginning. So like a perfect example, when I talk to people about contracts, especially when you're talking about negotiating and signing contracts, people get so caught up in just like getting the deal done and feeling like once we sign the contract, like that's it. But contracts are the lifeblood of those relationships. So that's just the starting point. Once you sign the contract, like this is the starting point of this relationship. So like literally almost every day, I get an email from a client, former client saying, hey, I am having some sort of issue with a contract you previously drafted for me or negotiated for me. Literally just this morning, I got an email from a past client. The subject line, not funny for them, but it was humorous. It was like new year, new drama. But but it was a situation where we had done some employment agreements for their team, and now someone, has quit unexpectedly, has started their own business with some very similar things going on. And so now there's some concerns about, is this a breach of our non-compete clause, and so, that's just one example of these things, like things are just gonna happen. I mean, last week I had somebody email me and was like, you remember that contract, that brand campaign you negotiated for me like 2 years ago? I'm like, first of all, of course I don't remember, how much I've seen in 2 years, but they're like, hey, this past agreement, I just noticed that they're still using my image but now on new content and they're running it like on paid ads for something else. Like, does my contract protect me from this? Like, what's the situation? And so, like, in that particular situation, because we made sure that there was certain language in the contract during those negotiations, it literally was a matter of an email that was like, hey, under the contract, this is what it says. You can't do that. And the brand was just extremely apologetic and was like, so like, this was an oversight, removed it, and it's done. Versus if you don't have a written contract in place, this can now turn into just a much bigger headache. And when you're, as an entrepreneur, you already have so much on your plate, right? You have so much you're doing and that you're focusing on. No one wants to have to shift their energy to now deal with this, because it's always random, right? It's always like in the middle of you like launching something. It's always, you just don't have time to deal with it. And so again, just having those legal protections in place, of course they save you money, but even more than that, they just save you the energy.
Totally. Because you're right. It is out the blue and it's heartache. It just messes with your mind space,
Yep.
You said something that I really love, and I've heard you say this before. I love your philosophy of you have to act like that big brand before you've necessarily become that big brand, right? So you can really walk into that negotiation, own your value, etc. And I think that that's something I want to explore with you because that tendency is so rampant with the community that we serve. Like not even realizing how many people are watching us, downloading our stuff, looking to us for value, like recommending us to their friends, like, hey, listen to this podcast, read this book, check out this freebie. Like, this is so, we don't fully internalize how great our impact is. And it's not just about protecting ourselves, but it's about and being in that defensive position, but it's also about really starting to see our IP and the content and the wisdom that we give to the world as valuable assets that we deserve to get paid for. And as women, especially as women of color, I think we've often been taught, trained, conditioned to just downplay our expertise or just downplay what we bring to the table or just it's okay. Here you go. You can have it. We want to be helpful. And so tell me about how you think about negotiating our value, especially when we have this legacy of not enoughness, maybe lurking in the background.
I love how you phrase that because there really is a lot of systematic hurdles that come into play just as much as those inevitable hurdles. And it does go back to, like you said, the things that we've just been trained and conditioned, as women of color that, we're not worth as much, we're not as of higher value. And so when you go into negotiations, it's so important to understand that human factor and realizing that it's not just the two people at the table. It's the two people and all of their biases and all of these systematic hurdles, all of these thoughts that are coming into play. And so it's really having to have a clear understanding of what everyone's ultimate end goal is. So understanding, of course, the business aspect of what am I tangibly hoping to get out of this, but also looking at what are you hoping to grow from this opportunity and understanding the impact of this opportunity beyond just today, just the right now. And I think that's probably one of the biggest hurdles that I face with clients and that I have to do a lot of kind of education on the front end of negotiations is, hey, I know that today the biggest thing you're concerned about is this advance payment on this book deal and the general kind of royalties maybe here, but there are other rights that you can make a lot more money on years down the road that we want to make sure that we spend some time on. And there's a lot that kind of goes into negotiations because, again, you're dealing with these a lot of mindset issues that we all struggle with that are coming to the table with you as well. And I find that a lot of people, not only do they naturally devalue what they personally bring to the table, but there's definitely a gap in education and understanding how you make money from IP. Like it truly gets down to the basics of people not understanding this is how you can make money from your IP. And it's different in every industry. If we're talking about music, there's mechanical royalties, performance royalties, sync licenses, digital performance royalties, publishing. You're talking about book publishing, you have merchandising rights, audio rights. There's so many different TV and film. So there's so many different ways that you can make money from intellectual property that people just simply don't know, honestly. And so I think that was maybe a roundabout answer to your question. But there's just a lot of factors. There's a lot of factors that come into play.
Hey, if anything you're hearing today inspires you to get more visible as a go-to trusted voice for your audience and drive change towards your deeper mission, I've got something for you. LinkedIn is my favorite place to share my stories and build relationships with my co-conspirators and brand new friends. So I put together a free resource with 14 prompts to create your next post on LinkedIn. Take all the guesswork out of what to say and just start building your impact and influence. Be sure to tag me in your post so I can come by, cheer you on, and amplify your message. You can find those free prompts in the show notes. Okay, back to the episode.
Maybe we can take it a little bit more specific, and I can be a little bit selfish and ask you about something I'm wrestling with right now, which is, I was asked to do a talk about LinkedIn to like a team, like a company. And it's kind of a keynote talk to their team, but they're going to record it and it's going to be used for like ongoing training and stuff. And so when I go into this negotiation, I'm just thinking, oh, well, I'll just charge what I do, like a talk. Like this can just be like a talk, like an hour of my time. But this is something that will live with them forever in my video, my blah, blah, blah. So how would you think about it in terms of going into that negotiation? Because really, like, I'm just going to, had we not had this conversation, I probably would have just charged for like a talk, but you're making me think I need to do something different. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I love this question because now you're getting into my like legal nerd out. Licensing is like one of my favorite things when it comes to like IP and contracts, because that's really how you control your IP and how you make money from it and how other people are going to use it. So when it comes to those keynote talks, and this is something I deal with regularly for clients who do a lot of these keynote talks, who are also going to have the recordings and their IP is going to be part of the program, the course, or the training later on, is you want to make sure that you're maintaining ownership of it. So that's one of the big things. A lot of times in these big corporate contracts, especially, I don't know the company that you're dealing with, but a lot of times they try to include this work for hire language in there, meaning that when you show up to do your talk, whatever you create during that talk now becomes their property. It's now their IP, so they can do whatever they want to with it years down the road. So you don't want, that's full stop, right? So you want to start by making sure that if there is some work for hire language in there, you're striking that out and saying, no, I'm going to own my talk, even whatever I create for this, I'm going to own that. And then you want to put some parameters around how they can then use your talk and the IP that you generate from it. So, and that's all licensing is. Licensing is just saying, I own this, I'm going to let you use it, but here are the parameters for how you can use it, right? And so you can say things like, you can use this talk in the future for marketing purposes, but specific to this event and only within this certain amount of time frame, right? We don't do things like in perpetuity. That's another big one. There's always this like work for hire, worldwide license in perpetuity. And it's like, okay, no, we're not. No. Okay. So these are all like red flag words, language, just like full stop, right? Let's not do it. So that's another way, just getting really specific on, because again, there's give and take to it, right? It's like, you have to understand where that big company is coming from, like their position of why they may want to own this IP or why they may want to use it later. And a lot of it is for marketing, their own internal purposes. A lot of it too can sometimes be laziness, right? They want to have the flexibility to be able to just take this thing and use it how they want to without having to come back and ask for your permission later. You want to get very specific on, well, what are your intended purposes? Like, what do you foresee using this content for later. And let's talk about that. Let's have a conversation about how you're thinking you may want to use this later. And I'll let you know whether that's something that's going to be reasonable for me or not. Because at the end of the day, if they want to do something beyond those parameters, then they need to pay you for that later, right? So if it's 2 years from now and they're like, oh, that talk Tanya did was so good, like, let's repurpose it, whatever, like that's great, but you need to pay me for that because that was my talk. That was my original idea.
Exactly. I love the way that you approach that too, in terms of getting into a relationship with them and having a conversation around it and not making assumptions and like letting that be the guiding factor. And the other thing I love about that too is I think I'll just speak for myself. There would be fear on being like, oh gosh, like if I'm too forceful about something or if I'm too whatever, if I'm too fill in the blank, they're going to not want to do this opportunity with me and go find someone else. But it's like, no, like you have to go in knowing your value, you know?
Knowing your value and also knowing that people are people. I think one of the biggest things that gets lost in negotiations really is, again, that human factor. Like it's all about building a relationship. And oftentimes you're likely going to do work with this company again years down the road. So you want to make sure that you're building that positive relationship from the beginning, but that you're also setting the standard from the beginning too. I had a client a few weeks ago. I was helping her with a contract. It was keynote, same exact type of thing. Keynote speech. It was an IP issue. The company, big company, had all this like crazy work for hire language. And now that this particular client has become more visible, they're charging more and all these things, they're like, now they're starting to question these terms. But part of the issue is that they've done so much work with this company in the past where they just agree to this kind of stuff that the company is like, well, what's the problem? Like, you've always said okay to this. Well, like, what's different now, right? And now one thing I do always tell people, listen, it's new day, new rules. But I say this to say you do want to set a good precedent from the beginning of this is how I operate and this is how this relationship should go. So as you continue to build that relationship and do, new collaborations with the same companies, that, that foundation's already been set.
That's such a good example because this work of visibility and building our personal brand and our thought leadership is so incremental because it takes consistency, but it's also exponential. And that as you get more visible, it's like rolling down a hill, you get faster and faster. And so a year from now, and I'm talking to both you and I'm talking to my listeners, like a year from now, your visibility and the demand, like what you can charge for showing up is going to be so much higher than it is today if you're consistent about this work. So yeah, like really listen to Casey. Like this is very, very important. So I want to ask you about your thought leadership journey and your visibility journey a little bit, because we've gotten to work together on this a bit in terms of your brand messaging and getting visible on LinkedIn. This is just a super open-ended question, but I want to ask you, like, what have you discovered or uncovered during your own visibility journey?
Oh gosh, what haven't I discovered in this journey? You have been an amazing guide in this process. When I first learned about Kindling Collective, I literally went into it like, okay, I want to get more visible on LinkedIn because I knew my people were on LinkedIn. I never really used it, but I was like, I should be showing up on LinkedIn. Like, I feel like that's a good space, right? And so I went into it just very like technical, like thinking I'm going to get some tools on what type of posts to do on LinkedIn, how to get good engagement and this kind of stuff, and not realizing the level not realizing that I needed to do this thought leadership work, and then realizing how much of it was going to just completely change my outlook on how I show up in the world. It was almost like I didn't realize that showing up from the space as a thought leader is what had really been the missing piece in my business for a very long time. And so it's been a wonderful journey. I've discovered a lot about myself, about what my clients and customers want, and just really showing up in a more just authentic way. It just feels like a very natural journey too. I guess that's probably one of the biggest takeaways is that it's been very necessary and it feels very natural. Like it doesn't feel like your typical kind of like marketing type of thing. This is my why. This is why I do the work I do. This is why it's important. And this is just how I show up in the world.
That makes so much sense, right? Because there's like an action orientation to this work of thought leadership. Like I define it as like it's a practice, it's a consistent practice where you're really tapping into your passion, your expertise, and your credibility to really build trust and community as you imagine and shape the future together for the better. And so you can see how doing that would be different than showing up with like, hey, this is what I do, these are my services, et cetera. It's like you're bringing people along into this world that they also want to see, right? Where Black people can like really create the legacy for futures, for generations to come because they have protected that legacy. What have you seen in terms of like a difference? Like, what have you, like, has anything changed as a result of showing up in this new way?
For sure. I would say I feel like the connections I'm making now are definitely a lot more like genuine. And they're kind of like connections I didn't think I could make in the online world in such a genuine way. I would say in the past, like these sorts of connections that I'm starting to build are connections that I would normally get through, physically attending conferences, speaking at events, and meeting people like face to face, one on one. But I'm finding that by showing up as a thought leader and really leading with my passion and my why, like I'm attracting just the type of people that I want to attract, the type of people that I want to be connected with, right? It doesn't feel like visibility for the sake of visibility, right? It's like
Yeah.
visibility, but centered around a larger purpose and just meeting other people who have similar desires. So I've been making some really meaningful connections, which has been great. Starting to get some really cool opportunities that are all very much aligned with things that I've always wanted to do. And so again, it just goes back to this thought leadership space was really the missing piece that I didn't know I was missing.
And I know that since you started doing this work, you were like, wait, I need to offer a different kind of VIP day because the people that are showing up, the people that I really want to serve, like they're needing something else, which I can also offer. So you have a new VIP day, deal in a day. Like, what is that all about?
So, if I can just step back for a minute to the
Yeah.
original VIP day that we worked on, when I first started in the Kindling Collective. So that is very much like a need for the clients that I serve in terms of identifying and understanding those like inevitable legal hurdles in their businesses. But what I was finding is that as much as people wanted to know this information, they really wanted implementation, right? And
Mm.
so what I've done with that particular VIP day is that I've now included the deliverables for that as a part of a signature package called Operation Legal House, where we literally go in and like get you the contracts you need, get your trademark, your copyright. We get those things in place, but you also walk away too with that legal guide and that resource that says, okay, in addition to what we've already done for you and we've started this process of getting your legal house in order, here's some other things that you're going to need, maybe it's a year from now or a couple of years from now, but you at least have that clarity so you know what you need to have set up so that when those inevitable things come along, those inevitable hurdles, you're ready for them and you're teed up and you're good to go. But so Deal in a Day, it's funny because Deal in a Day is actually the VIP Day offer I first ever worked on. So when I was in Jordan's program, Done in a Day, Deal in a Day is what I was working on. That's what I had developed out because so much of, as much as I help my clients with getting their legal house in order, getting these things in place, most of the ongoing work I do for clients is really that contract review negotiation. That's like the day in, the day out, need that people have. Because most of my clients is their businesses, their business structures are they're not complex, right? So once they have certain legal things in place, like they're good to go for a while. But it's those kind of collaborative relationships that they're constantly needing that insight on and needing an attorney to review things for them. But one of the biggest complaints that clients, have with attorneys is we tend to kind of slow things down, right? And it's for good reason because we want to make sure that we're not missing things, we're reviewing everything, your rights are adequately protected. But then there's also a space where attorneys, we don't always operate in the most efficient ways that work for how people, currently do business. And so when I was initially thinking of this VIP Day offer and building this out, 2 years ago now, it was really like, okay, well, what can I do? Because I already have a very tight process for how I review contracts. Like me and my team follow the same process. And we also only work with people in certain spaces. So the contracts we're seeing are the types of contracts we see all the time. And so I was like, I already have a really tight process for how I handle like contract review. Like, what if I put something out there where people are still getting that legal protection that they need? They're not missing the mark. We're actually starting the process of negotiations, because that's a strategic way too of getting things out the door, is building those relationships early on in the contract, negotiation process. So I was like, what if I created something where we could literally completely review, redline, and get a good bulk of these negotiations done in a day? Because I saw that as something that people were needing, something that people were wanting, because it's, again, attorneys, we get a bad rap for slowing things down, but I get it, because oftentimes in most relationships, I don't know your situation with the speaking opportunity you have coming up, but usually, clients have already been in talks with these companies and these brands for months before the contract comes about and they hand it off to me. So the last thing you really want is to have to slow down that momentum in that process by having to wait another couple of months just to have, an attorney review your contract.
Right. It makes so much sense, right? It makes so much sense. And it gives people that peace of mind right away, which is fabulous. So this has been amazing. This has been so helpful. I didn't even know that I was going to get legal advice and support from this. You can send me your invoice later. But my last question for you, and it's the last question I ask of everyone, because, it's what this work is really about, is like, can you tell me about your dreamy, just vision for the future?
Yeah. So my dreamy vision would be that Black creatives and entrepreneurs would stop playing small, that they would show up in the world understanding the value that they bring to the table, understanding their innate gifts, start operating like those big brands that they desire to be and that they are destined to be. Because just as much as those hurdles are inevitable, so is success. So that success is inevitable. So start planning, getting your legal house in order before those things happen, so that when they do, it's just 5-minute email and not a 5-month back and forth, thousands of dollars that have now been spent. So I would say that's, it's really that mindset shift of showing up in the world, understanding your value, and understanding the importance of owning the things that you create. And so when you are presented with these big opportunities, that you're entering into equitable partnerships that really help in building that generational wealth and that legacy.
That's incredible. And it all starts with that orientation around like success is inevitable. Like if we could all truly believe that, like what a different world it would be. I love that so much. That was awesome. That was awesome. Thank you so much for being here, Casey. This was such a delight and so informative and just fabulous. And I'm so grateful to have you in my life. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
What'd you think? Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, or even better, reach out and let me know through lumosmarketing.co. Yes, that's Lumos, as in the illumination spell from Harry Potter. Because when you shine, magical things happen. You can get social with me on LinkedIn, and of course, check out the show notes to stay in touch with our guests. Let's talk soon.